When you stand before the Great Pyramid of Giza, overwhelmed by its sheer scale and seemingly impossible perfection, you can't help but wonder, why did the ancients go to such extraordinary lengths to build something so absurdly grand? To bury a king? To display power? Or was it for something deeper? Something no one has dared to say out loud. For centuries, the world has been fascinated by the visible face of the pyramid, its corridors, burial chambers, and physical structure. But few have paid attention to what lies beneath. The desert land of Giza, which appears empty on the surface, actually hides a labyrinth of underground tunnels, deep shafts, and mysterious hollow chambers that modern science is only beginning to explore. Why haven't these discoveries been made public? Why have certain excavations been abruptly halted? And why do official archaeological maps omit some structures that radar has already confirmed? This isn't just an archaeological story, it's a silent struggle between what humanity has the right to know and what remains buried beneath layers of limestone, beneath the pyramids we thought we understood. It wasn't just in modern times that people began to suspect something was being deliberately hidden beneath Giza. As far back as the 19th century, when explorers first approached the site with a scientific mindset, many started noticing signs that weren't mentioned in any textbook. They documented deep shafts, fissures leading to underground passages, and even strange gusts of wind rising from the earth. Some dismissed these as fantasy, but several old maps recorded markers that, to this day, ground-penetrating radar has confirmed as real hollow spaces in the exact same spots. In the early 1990s, a team of German archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area south of the Great Pyramid. The results were startling. Beneath the limestone bedrock, about 25 meters down, was a large rectangular chamber. This wasn't some random geological formation. The shape, location, and proportions led experts to believe it had been intentionally built, not naturally formed. But when the team applied for a permit to excavate, the process was abruptly halted. The Egyptian authorities gave no clear explanation. Equipment already on site had to be dismantled, and the data collected, it was never fully released. The international archaeology community began to speak out. Many believed that critical discoveries were being withheld, not due to lack of evidence, but because they had the power to shake what we've long accepted as historical truth. Curiously, not all of this information came from scientists. Local villagers had passed down stories for generations, tales of bottomless wells where children once tossed stones and never heard them land. Some places were considered cursed, avoided entirely after dark. For years, these were dismissed as superstition until modern instruments confirmed the presence of underground voids exactly where those stories said they would be. During his tenure, Dr. Zahi Hawass, the most influential Egyptologist of our time, acknowledged that there were tunnels beneath Giza that remained unexplored. Yet, he never released detailed maps or full survey results. Some have accused him of deliberately withholding information for political or personal gain. No one can say for sure. But it's clear that beneath the desert stone, much remains unsaid. Things get even more complicated when we look at ancient writings from the Greek and Roman eras. Some texts mention the Library of Thoth, a vault of sacred knowledge supposedly protected beneath the pyramids. While there's no physical proof, the descriptions in those texts closely match radar data from 2011, which revealed a series of linked chambers and narrow passageways deep beneath the bedrock. Even modern satellite images have detected strange thermal anomalies around the base of the Khufu pyramid, potential signs of voids beneath the surface. In 2017, muon scanning technology, which uses cosmic particles to detect empty space, confirmed the presence of a previously unknown large void above the main passage inside the Khufu pyramid. This only added to the belief among researchers that if such spaces exist above, then even more may lie untouched below. Perhaps the most intriguing theory is of a hidden tunnel system linking the three main pyramids, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. Some archaeologists believe it once served as an underground ceremonial center where priests conducted sacred rites or stored ancient texts. If that's true, it might explain why excavations in this area are so politically and culturally sensitive. From another angle, if an ancient library really does lie beneath the pyramids, containing knowledge of astronomy, medicine, or even prehistoric technology, it wouldn't just rewrite Egypt's history, it would force Western history as a whole to rewrite countless chapters. The irony is striking. The more advanced our technology becomes, the more evidence we find suggesting that Giza isn't empty beneath the surface. And yet, the more evidence there is, the less gets shared. Some scholars argue that information control is necessary to prevent public panic. Others call it a deliberate cover-up, keeping humanity from its true origins. But maybe the most important question is the one we've never dared to ask outright: if something truly is being hidden beneath the pyramids, who is hiding it and why? There's no denying that the pyramids of Giza are timeless wonders, but their brilliance isn't limited to what stands above ground. As early as the 20th century, scattered reports from geologists noted that the limestone base surrounding the Khufu pyramid wasn't entirely uniform. In certain areas, tapping on the surface produced a hollow echo, suggesting that empty spaces might lie beneath. Some stone samples even showed signs of being carved from below rather than from the top, a detail that contradicts the known construction methods of ancient Egypt. In the 1950s, a team of Egyptian engineers was laying the foundation for an auxiliary structure near the Menkaure pyramid when they unexpectedly uncovered a 6-meter-long stone tunnel. It descended underground, then suddenly ended at a wall sealed with granite. They didn't continue digging, not because they lacked tools, but because they were instructed to stop. No official record of the event was ever published, but an internal document from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities included a hand-drawn diagram marking the exact location of the tunnel. To this day, that site remains sealed. Such incidents are not rare. Independent archaeologists have been denied permits to investigate off-limits areas, even when they themselves provided the initial data showing signs of anomalies. Some who tried to share their findings with international media abruptly ceased their research. A French researcher who publicly accused authorities of a systematic effort to control information withdrew from archaeology just months after, appearing in a televised documentary. But perhaps the most striking detail is the repetition. Discoveries made in different places, at different times, all pointing to the same conclusion. Beneath Giza lies an underground layer that remains largely unexplored. In 1999, during a thermal scan conducted by Cairo University to measure temperature differences across stone blocks, researchers identified 3 unusual heat signatures on the northern face of the Khufu pyramid. These hotspots did not align with any known rooms or passageways. The data was sent for further analysis, but no official report was ever published. When asked about it, the lead researcher offered only a brief response. There are things we cannot explain at this time. So the question becomes, why? Why the silence in the face of evidence that could open a new chapter in global archaeology? The answer goes beyond mere archaeological control. It lies in the potential impact of what might be discovered. If those underground chambers contain texts, artifacts, or structures that don't fit within the accepted historical timeline, then everything we believe about the history of Egyptian civilization, and possibly even human civilization, would have to be rewritten. Some theories are modest. Perhaps these are simply unfinished ceremonial rooms or storage areas for construction tools. But it's the resistance to exploration that casts doubt even on the simplest explanations. After all, if it's just an empty room, why keep it hidden? At a 2018 academic conference in Paris, Italian archaeologist Alessandro De Sanctis offered a bold hypothesis. Giza was never intended as a burial site. It was a vault, not for mummies, but for knowledge. He referenced similar practices across ancient civilizations. Astronomical, agricultural, and medical knowledge was often encoded and preserved in symbolic architecture, protected from natural disasters or war. If he's right, then the pyramids were never meant to be tombs as we've always assumed. They may have been protective shells, shielding something far more valuable hidden beneath. And if that's the case, the question is no longer what lies beneath the pyramids, but rather, why has it remained concealed for so long? Because in an era when humanity has sent instruments to Mars and explored the deepest parts of the ocean, the inability or unwillingness to uncover what lies just beneath one of the greatest wonders of human history can no longer be explained by science alone. If there truly is an ancient knowledge repository hidden beneath the pyramids, then what drove the Egyptians to construct such a complex system? And how could they possibly have done it with the technology of their time? That question isn't just a technical puzzle. It's a direct challenge to modern arrogance. Have we underestimated the intellect of an ancient civilization, from multi-ton stones placed with millimeter precision to the near-perfect alignment with constellations, especially Orion? The pyramids are more than architectural achievements. They are messages. But to whom those messages were intended and for what purpose remains a question no one has been able to answer definitively. One of the most curious patterns is the repetition of hidden numbers. In the Great Pyramid's design, the ratio of its perimeter to twice its height nearly equals pi, a mathematical constant not recorded by any known civilization of that era. The inner chambers and corridors of the Khufu pyramid also have lengths and angles that align mysteriously with astronomical phenomena. So, could it be that these structures weren't merely symbolic, but a kind of map or code pointing towards something buried deeper below? That brings us to a crucial reality. Ancient Egypt was a society built on layers. Not everyone had equal access to information. Certain texts were carved deep inside tombs far from the eyes of the public. Ceremonies were conducted in the stillness of night, in secret chambers by high-ranking priests. If there truly was a vault of timeless knowledge, it would have been reserved for only a select few. There are persistent references to the Void Room, an underground chamber that many archaeologists believe may have once held the most precious artifacts. According to some old maps, this chamber could be accessed via a sealed tunnel on the southeast side of the Khufu pyramid. Yet that area has never been officially excavated and remains off-limits to this day. Is that just coincidence? Further, adding to the mystery, internal records from the British colonial era mention an unofficial excavation in the late 19th century where a survey team reportedly discovered a small chamber nearly 30 meters below the surface. Inside were stone slabs, inscribed with hieroglyphs unlike anything previously documented. But when the team returned to London, the records vanished from the National Archives. All official traces of the expedition were erased. Though unconfirmed, this has become one of the most controversial pieces of the Giza puzzle. Still, if there is secrecy, it doesn't always stem from conspiracy. Sometimes it comes from fear. Because if there truly exists a subterranean system holding knowledge that transcends time, mathematical formulas, astronomical data, medical practices, or even records of prehistoric civilizations, then this is no longer an archaeological issue. It becomes a question of identity, of the intellectual foundations we've built our world upon. Admitting that an ancient culture may have known more than we do could trigger a global crisis of belief. And so, as the questions linger, many choose silence. A silence by choice. A quiet consensus that some things are better left in the dark, but history never truly sleeps. Every generation produces those who ask the questions. They dig, they search, they connect the forgotten dots. And though they may be blocked, they keep going, because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually rises like a stone that refuses to stay hidden. In 1993, a name sent ripples through the archaeological world. Rudolf Gantenbrink, a German engineer specializing in robotic exploration. Invited to Giza to conduct a survey inside the Great Pyramid, he designed a small device called Upuaut-2, capable of navigating the narrow, deep and dangerous shafts that no human could enter. His mission, to investigate a mysterious ventilation shaft inside the Queen's chamber, one that had been sealed off for thousands of years. As the robot journeyed through the narrow passage, just 20 centimeters wide and over 60 meters deep, Gantenbrink discovered a small stone door fitted with metal pins. This wasn't some random slab. It was finely crafted with two metal handles resembling an actual door leading to a space no one had ever entered. The announcement shocked the world, but then the unexpected happened. Gantenbrink was removed from the project. All exploration was abruptly halted. No clear explanation was given. It wasn't until nearly a decade later, in 2002, that another team revisited the shaft. They deployed a new robot equipped with a miniature camera. When it passed through the first door, what they found wasn't a room, but another narrow corridor, ending in a second door. Immediately, new questions arose. Who would build 2 consecutive doors inside a ventilation shaft? And if not for ventilation, and then for what purpose? One theory emerged. It could be a hidden passageway, possibly part of a ceremonial or communication system, one that connects to underground chambers. And perhaps this shaft wasn't the only one. There might be an entire network that, for reasons unknown, no one is allowed to fully explore. These hidden voids aren't limited to shafts and corridors. Another bombshell discovery was the so-called Big Void, a massive empty space detected using muon scanning technology in 2017. Measuring roughly 30 meters in length, it lies directly above the Grand Gallery, the central ascending passage within the Khufu pyramid. Despite its elevated position, the very existence of such a large, previously undocumented space is difficult for any serious researcher to accept without raising concerns. What made matters even more suspicious was the vague response from Egyptian authorities. Instead of expanding the survey, they limited access to the area. The muon scan images were kept under wraps, with only partial diagrams released. The official reason? To avoid disturbing the ancient structure. But many experts believe this was simply a way to avoid having to explain what couldn't yet be explained. At the same time, forgotten historical documents from the 19th century, tucked away in libraries in Paris and Berlin, began resurfacing. Among them were hand-drawn illustrations describing unusual deep fissures around the pyramid's base. Some of these matched thermal anomalies detected in the early 2000s. Could it be that earlier observers had sensed the underground system and tried to record it, even if only symbolically? And it wasn't only Western accounts. Several medieval Arabic texts, particularly from the 10th century, spoke of a network of subterranean chambers built beneath the pyramids by kings who lived before the Great Flood, constructed to preserve knowledge from destruction. While many modern scholars have dismissed these as metaphorical myths, the uncanny alignment between these ancient descriptions and current radar-detected voids has led some to reconsider. One thing is clear: if an underground system truly exists, it has been thoroughly protected, not just with stone, but with silence. Most technical data has only been partially released. Independent researchers are denied access to critical locations, and above all, a dense fog of bureaucracy, filled with permits, restrictions, and archaeological jurisdiction, has made penetrating Giza's hidden spaces nearly impossible for the broader scientific community. In such an environment, one thing remains solid: doubt. In the world of archaeology, doubt is not a flaw, it's a driving force. It is skepticism, after all, that has led to some of humanity's greatest discoveries. But what makes Giza such an unusual case isn't the lack of evidence, it's the overwhelming presence of unexplained evidence and the unusual reactions that surround it. The underground voids, the sealed stone doors, the withheld maps, all seem to form a repeating pattern. Whenever a discovery appears to lead toward a greater truth, it's either blurred, interrupted, or redirected. This has left many researchers disillusioned. Some have even left the field altogether, no longer trusting the transparency of modern archaeology. One of the most striking examples is Dr. Sakuji Yoshimura, a Japanese archaeologist who led collaborative projects between Egypt and Japan in the 1980s and 90s. His team used ultrasonic sensors to survey the bedrock around the Great Pyramid. In an internal report, they recorded anomalous acoustic reflections beneath the southern section of the pyramid. But when they requested permission to excavate these points, their funding was suddenly cut. The data was archived and never officially released. That hasn't stopped independent scholars from following the clues. Several international teams have used high-resolution satellite imaging to observe Giza from space. They discovered recurring thermal anomalies around the base of the pyramid, especially at dawn and dusk when the sun's angle shifts rapidly. These hotspots appear to transfer heat differently than solid stone, suggesting the presence of voids or subsurface structures. These are no longer unsupported theories. With the backing of modern science, the stones of Giza are slowly revealing details that traditional archaeology can't explain, and that's the heart of the issue. Despite the vast knowledge we have about ancient Egypt, we may still be missing its most essential layer. The more unsettling question isn't what have we overlooked, it's, is someone making sure we continue to overlook it? This complexity is compounded by the political and economic dimensions of archaeology in Egypt. With millions of tourists flocking to wonders like Giza every year, controlling archaeological information isn't just an academic issue, it's about national image. An unfiltered discovery could shake the carefully curated narrative that drives tourism and global fascination. From a government's perspective, protecting the myth may feel safer than opening the door to uncertainty. Yet some truths cannot stay buried forever. The 21st century has brought with it a wave of new technologies: Mune scanning, ground-penetrating radar, full 3D modeling through satellite imagery, and AI-assisted analysis of ancient architecture. With these tools, detecting subterranean voids beneath the pyramids is becoming only a matter of time. And as more pieces fall into place, the hard questions will eventually demand answers. Who built these hidden spaces, and why? More and more voices are now reconsidering the original premise. Perhaps the entire Giza complex and the pyramids, the Sphinx and all, is just the visible part of a much larger buried structure, a kind of underground city, or a ceremonial temple network long forgotten by official history and swallowed by time. If that theory proves true, then everything we think we know about ancient Egypt may be only a fragment of a much deeper story, a story that the priesthood or ruling elite may have deliberately kept hidden, not just from their own people, but from every future generation. There's one critical piece of the Giza puzzle that cannot be overlooked: the Great Sphinx. For centuries, it has been regarded as a religious symbol, a guardian of the pharaoh's spirit. But the deeper researchers dig, the more archaeologists begin to question whether the Sphinx is more than just symbolic. What if it's a door leading downward? As early as the 1920s, survey records from British explorers mentioned indentations near the base of the Sphinx, one of which was described as resembling an entrance. But once this information began to circulate, the area surrounding the statue was sealed off and designated a restricted archaeological zone. Nearly a century later, in 1997, a research team from the University of Florida, in coordination with Egypt's Antiquities Authority, conducted a radar scan of the ground surrounding the Sphinx. They confirmed the presence of at least 2 hollow spaces beneath the statue, oriented toward the Khafra pyramid. These findings were never publicly excavated. This raises a fundamental question: why are there voids beneath the Sphinx if it was meant to be purely symbolic? Unlike the pyramids, which are built from stacked blocks, the Sphinx was carved directly out of the bedrock, meaning that any cavities beneath it had to be cut before the statue itself was sculpted. That's not just a technical detail. It's indirect evidence of a deliberate purpose embedded into the design from the very beginning. Some researchers have theorized that the Sphinx serves as the starting point of a vast subterranean system, a network of tunnels and chambers stretching beneath the entire Giza plateau. According to this theory, the 3 main pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are not standalone structures, but surface markers for underground nodes. The Sphinx, then, is the gate, a real-world symbol marking the entrance to the world below. What strengthens this theory is the layout of the Giza monuments when viewed from above. Astronomers have long pointed out the alignment between the 3 pyramids and the stars of Orion's belt, but few have noted that it's the slight offset of the Menkaure pyramid that perfects this match. That intentional shift has led many to believe that Giza itself is a code, one that not only mirrors the heavens but points towards something hidden beneath. This is not mere speculation. In 2010, a French research team used ground-penetrating imaging to detect a series of echo patterns beneath the plateau, stretching from near the Sphinx all the way to the base of the Khafra pyramid. They described it as evidence of a possible underground corridor or horizontal shaft. Whether man-made or natural remains unconfirmed, but the alignment was too precise to be coincidental. And if such a tunnel does exist, it's not just a passage. It might lead to a forgotten archive, or a space deliberately erased from historical memory. Mainstream archaeologists have pushed back hard against such theories, often labeling them unverified speculation. But the irony is undeniable. The very technologies used by traditional scholars, radar, muon scans, infrared imaging, are now pointing to anomalies that defy the established narrative. They are drawing attention to places in the ground, in the stone, and in the silence, where the eye alone cannot see. Looking deeper, one can understand why the truth, if it exists, would be buried so carefully. Because if underground tunnels, chambers, and a library beneath the earth truly exist, then the entire framework of ancient Egypt must be reimagined, not as a thriving agricultural culture, but as a civilization that encrypted knowledge, using architecture itself as a medium to preserve wisdom for future generations. And if that's the case, then perhaps we've never truly understood Giza. When we begin to entertain the hypothesis that Giza is not merely a relic of ancient Egypt, but a gateway to a deeper layer of hidden knowledge, we can't ignore one particularly strange category of evidence: the missing ancient maps. Not All of them are myths. Some documents were once confirmed to exist, housed in the Library of Alexandria, or preserved in European monasteries during the Middle Ages, only to vanish mysteriously from official archives. One of the most controversial examples is the so-called Min-Tin map, believed to date back to the Ptolemaic era around the 3rd century BCE. The map allegedly describes a system of underground chambers connected by stone corridors beneath the Giza Plateau, with a central station located directly beneath the feet of the lion statue. The description of the lion, especially the phrase "eyes closed, facing east," closely aligns with the Great Sphinx, possibly alluding to corridors beneath the monument itself. The map was mentioned in a 14th century chronicle from a Benedictine monastery in Italy. However, when modern researchers attempted to access the original, they found only a copy, one that lacked key portions of the text. Some skeptical scholars have suggested that such records may have been deliberately hidden or destroyed during periods of war or church upheaval. The mystery deepened in the late 19th century when a similar document surfaced in Paris. A Belgian scholar named Antoine Lefebvre claimed to have discovered a Coptic manuscript in the archives of the Louvre, detailing a network of underground paths connecting the 3 pillars of light of the god Ra. According to Lefebvre, these pillars of light were a metaphor for the 3 pyramids. The manuscript was reportedly sent for restoration, but after a small fire broke out in the storage room in 1901, it was never seen again. So, do these maps and records truly exist, or are they merely artifacts of imagination? The answer may not lie in belief, but in the fact that many of their descriptions align strikingly well with recent findings from modern scientific tools. Take the Min-Tin map, for instance. It describes 3 doors descending underground, located 60, 110 and 130 steps southeast from the center of the Khufu pyramid. In a 2012 geophysical survey, international researchers discovered 3 radar echo points at nearly the same distances and directions, all more than 20 meters below the surface, with no clear geological explanation. Could it be that ancient people really knew and documented something we are only now beginning to uncover? This raises an even more provocative possibility. What if the builders of the pyramids were not the ancient Egyptians we've long believed them to be? Or, more accurately, what if the Egyptians were inheritor, not originators? The theory of a forgotten prehistoric civilization, one that existed before ancient Egypt and left traces buried beneath the surface, is not new. From Plato's Tale of Atlantis to ancient Indian texts describing subterranean cities, of the Rishi, stories of lost civilizations abound. Whether destroyed by cataclysms, war, or intentional erasure, these ancient cultures were said to possess profound knowledge. Giza, with its strategic location, stable geology, and arid climate, ideal for long-term preservation, would be a perfect place to safeguard what mattered most. And yet no one in mainstream archaeology dares to address this possibility. Publicly, academic dissertations and top scientific journals almost universally ignore the idea of a prehistoric advanced civilization, not because the data is lacking, but because proposing such a theory would mean challenging centuries of established historical structure. And in the academic world, preserving the framework often takes precedence over uncovering the truth. But not everyone is willing to stay silent. Amid the erased records, vanished maps, and silenced voices, one pattern stands out with unsettling consistency. A long list of international archaeological projects in Giza that were abruptly halted, often just as they approached what could have been a breakthrough discovery beneath the plateau. One striking example is the GPR Cairo 2006 project, a collaborative effort between German and Japanese researchers aimed at creating a 3D ground-penetrating radar map of the bedrock surrounding the Sphinx and the base of the Khafra pyramid. After months of scanning, the team announced the detection of a previously undocumented deep corridor beneath the ancient limestone extending northeastward. They requested a permit for a small exploratory drill. Just 48 hours later, all permits were revoked by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, citing the need to ensure the safety of heritage structures. But leaked documents suggested the real reason might not have been so simple. An internal report later surfaced, revealing that radar data from the corridor site showed multiple layered echo responses, suggesting the presence of a sequence of underground chambers, not just a single tunnel. This lined up with the theory that the pyramids are not merely standalone monuments above ground, but the visible peaks of a much broader subterranean complex. Another telling case comes from the 1980 Sonar Sphinx project, led by American engineers Thomas Debicki and John Anthony West. Using seismic and ultrasonic scanning beneath the Sphinx, they identified several rectangular voids, ranging from 5 to 12 meters deep. Crucially, the cavities weren't natural. Their sharp corners and clean lines pointed to human construction. Yet after their findings were published, Egyptian authorities promptly denied the accuracy of the instruments and suspended all further investigation. That led to a critical question. If the findings were wrong, why not continue the survey and prove it? And if they were right, why shut everything down? The global academic community began to split. Some conservative scholars argued that international teams lacked cultural sensitivity and were prone to sensationalism. But independent researchers pushed back, claiming that without those so-called sensational claims, many discoveries would be permanently buried in locked filing cabinets of state institutions. A deeper concern began to emerge: the possibility of a coordinated system of information control, not just within Egypt, but across international heritage networks. Investigative journalists pointed to overlaps between archaeological funding boards, heritage preservation agencies, and academic institutions. In such a tightly woven system, publishing a discovery that's too controversial could mean losing research grants, being ostracized from academic circles, or even being denied travel visas. The weight of such consequences has led many scientists to walk away, quietly. They've taken with them untold stories, unpublished maps, and hard drives full of raw data, information that, if shared, might entirely reshape how we view Giza. Meanwhile, the voids beneath the plateau remain silent, cold, and patient, waiting for someone brave enough to dig deeper. Perhaps the truth lies right beneath our feet, buried not only in stone and sand, but in a silence that has lasted for millennia. When we speak of ancient Egypt, we often take it for granted that the history of this land begins around 3100 BCE, the era when Nama unified Upper and Lower Egypt. But there is evidence, overlooked or intentionally ignored, suggesting that Giza may have been in use long before that, during a time beyond the reach of official historical records. One of the most controversial pieces of evidence is the Great Sphinx itself. For years, mainstream archaeology has claimed that it was built around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra. However, independent geological studies of water erosion on the statue's body have led to a radically different hypothesis, that the Sphinx could have existed thousands of years before Khafra, during a period when Egypt's climate was still wet and rainy, at least between 7000 and 9000 BCE. This research, led by geologist Robert Schoch in the 1990s, sent shockwaves through the scientific community, because if the Sphinx dates back more than 10,000 years, then a civilization capable of building such a colossal stone monument existed long before anything recorded in known history. The academic establishment was quick to push back, arguing that the erosion could have been caused by wind or other environmental factors. But Schoch and his colleagues countered that the vertical, deeply rounded weathering on the Sphinx's body could only have been caused by prolonged, heavy rainfall over centuries, something that hasn't occurred in Giza for at least 5,000 years. If this theory holds, then the Sphinx was not built by the ancient Egyptians, but by a pre-Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians may have simply repurposed or built around it. This interpretation echoes with uncanny clarity the once dismissed myths about a divine king who constructed a lion statue facing east before a great flood came and wiped out his entire kingdom. Beyond the Sphinx, several bedrock layers beneath the Khufu pyramid show signs of construction far too precise for the tools believed to exist at that time. Multi-ton stone blocks are fitted seamlessly without mortar, using a method of interlocking so exact it still challenges modern engineering. Japanese researchers once analyzed the cut surfaces of these stones and concluded that the tools used must have been harder than modern steel, a technology supposedly far beyond what ancient Egyptians had access to. Once again, the same question arises: if the Egyptians didn't build this from the beginning, who did? And if it was a prehistoric civilization, why did they disappear? Was it war? Catastrophe? Or did they simply choose to be forgotten in ancient Egyptian texts? There are cryptic references to a time called Zep Tepi, the first time. According to myth, it was an age when the gods descended to earth and brought knowledge to humanity. While most modern scholars view this as religious allegory, some symbologists and alternative historians have dared to ask, what if it wasn't just metaphor? What if the gods were members of a civilization predating Egypt, later deified by those who survived? And if they truly existed, what made them leave? Could it be that Giza, with its intricate underground design, was the vault where they buried their final knowledge, a message for those who would come after? Seen from that perspective, everything we are doing today, from bedrock surveys and muon scans to probing mysterious air shafts, isn't exploration. It's decoding. We are following faint traces left behind by a civilization that chose to speak through stone, through silence, and through mysteries buried deep beneath the sands of Giza. For thousands of years, humanity has believed that the greatest ancient library in history was the Library of Alexandria, a legendary archive that once held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, preserving the knowledge of civilizations past. But there is a lesser-known and even lesser-spoken hypothesis that Alexandria was not the first, and certainly not the oldest. Some scholars believe that the first great library lies beneath the sands of Giza, built thousands of years or before Egyptian civilization rose to prominence. This wasn't a library in the modern sense, no shelves, no librarians. It was a vault of knowledge encoded in symbols, architecture, and physical artifacts, embedded in stone chambers, narrow shafts, and hidden corridors. An ancient repository of wisdom, not meant for use, but for protection. This theory has existed for a long time, largely dismissed by academia, but a series of discoveries in recent decades has begun to blur the line between legend and possibility. In 1935, British explorer Paul Brunton recorded in his travel journal a strange encounter in Egypt. A local mystic had told him of a hidden library guarded by sacred spirits beneath Giza. Though the story sounded mystical, Brunton insisted the man's voice and gaze were not those of a dreamer, but of someone who knew something was being deliberately hidden. Over half a century later, in 1997, American author and researcher Andrew Collins published a provocative book titled Gods of Eden. Drawing from ancient texts, old excavation maps, and ground-penetrating radar data, Collins argued that a vast network of tunnels under Giza, a structure he referred to as the Hall of Records, truly existed. Collins wasn't an archaeologist, but what caught the attention of the scientific community was that some of the coordinates he mentioned in the book aligned with voids later detected in geophysical surveys in the early 2000s. Even some conservative Egyptologists eventually admitted the presence of unexplained geological anomalies south of the Sphinx, the same area Collins had pinpointed as a possible entrance to the ancient archive. Equally compelling are the repeated references in Egyptian texts to the god Thoth, the divine figure of wisdom and writing. Legend says he recorded the total knowledge of the ancient world into 42 sacred scrolls, hiding them in a place where light cannot reach, reserved only for the worthy. To most scholars this is symbolic, but what if it isn't? The connection between Thoth and the Sphinx is even more intriguing. In some traditions, the Sphinx is not merely a guardian of royal tombs, but the gatekeeper to Thoth's hidden knowledge. That legend eerily mirrors ground-penetrating radar scans of the southern and eastern sides of the Sphinx, where sealed voids, lying 15 to 25 meters beneath the limestone, have been repeatedly detected. No public excavation has taken place at these coordinates, but that hasn't stopped the theory from spreading. Independent teams from Russia, Japan, and the US have quietly gathered thermal satellite data, subsurface scans, and infrared imagery, searching for patterns in the bedrock. The results, though inconclusive, consistently point to an unusual, large-scale, intentionally arranged system beneath the surface. If an underground library truly exists, why hasn't it ever been opened? Maybe it no longer exists. Maybe it was buried over time by shifting groundwater, natural erosion, or the slow disappearance of its entrance. But maybe, and this is the idea that gives many pause, it still exists fully intact, but no one has been allowed inside. And if that's true, the question is no longer does it exist, but rather, who is guarding it? In the world of archaeology, the pyramids have long been admired for their sheer scale and precision. But look deeper, and one begins to question whether such meticulous detail, from the angles to the height-to-perimeter ratios, could really have been intended just for a tomb. When modern engineers remeasured the Great Pyramid of Khufu, they uncovered a mathematical curiosity. If you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the height, the result is remarkably close to pi's with an error so small it defies coincidence. In fact, some scholars note that when measured in ancient Egyptian cubits, the ratio is accurate to 4 decimal places, and it's not just pi. The ratio between the pyramid's height and half its base length mirrors that of the Golden Triangle, a mathematical symbol of harmony and eternity found in many ancient cultures. These proportions suggest that the pyramid's architect was not merely a builder, but a mathematician, an astronomer, perhaps even someone entrusted with encoding knowledge into stone. Which raises the question, why embed mathematical knowledge in architecture? And if the structure is a message, have we truly understood what it's trying to say? Some researchers now approach the pyramid as an ancient cipher. They analyze every dimension, every alignment, every slope of each corridor as part of a coded system, one that may point to coordinates, a hidden map, or a sequence of instructions meant to unlock something deeper. Perhaps the most intriguing feature is the Grand Gallery, a long ascending corridor roughly 47 meters in length and over 8 meters high, with a construction style entirely unlike any other part of the pyramid. While mainstream theory sees it as a passageway, a more radical interpretation proposes that it's a symbolic measuring device, where each stone step represents a unit of knowledge or a spatial interval. In 2013, a study suggested that when you multiply the number of steps in the Grand Gallery by the height of each step, measured in cubits, the result comes startlingly close to the Earth's equatorial circumference divided by 1,000. That's not likely to be a coincidence, unless the builders had knowledge of Earth's dimensions thousands of years ago. There's another overlooked detail: the orientation of the pyramid. The four sides of Khufu's base align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with a margin of error of less than a 1/20th of a degree. At a time when compasses didn't exist and modern astronomy hadn't been developed, this level of precision remains difficult to explain. Some astronomers have proposed that the pyramid was aligned with specific stars in the constellations, Orion and Canis Major. If true, the orientation may not be merely religious. It could function as a celestial marker or navigational tool. Within this framework, the alignments on the surface might indicate precise locations underground. Seen this way, the entire structure of the Khufu pyramid isn't just a monument. It's a three-dimensional guide system where every ratio, every angle, and every alignment contributes to a map leading somewhere deeper. No one knows how much of this ancient code we've actually deciphered. Perhaps 10%, maybe less. But what is clear is this: the pyramid is not simple, and if a subterranean library truly exists, as many believe, then the pyramid itself is the key to unlocking it, but a key is only useful to someone who knows how to decode it. And so far, the world is still waiting for a reader of stone, someone precise enough, perceptive enough to finally open the door. In the modern world, the pyramids are often seen as symbols of engineering brilliance and mathematical precision. But to the ancient Egyptians, these colossal stone structures were far more than physical monuments. They were spiritual instruments. They were part of a sacred belief system where rituals, sound, movement, and light could unlock dimensions of space inaccessible to ordinary perception. This may sound mystical, but when we examine how the Egyptians used acoustics, light, and spatial design in their ceremonies, certain revelations begin to emerge. Ancient texts and temple reliefs describe nighttime rituals held under the full moon, where priests stood at specific marked points around the pyramid. Holding copper staffs, they chanted sacred verses in specific tones, using harmonics designed for resonance. These ceremonies weren't merely symbolic, they seemed to have been part of an intentional resonance system, using sound frequencies to interact with the very stone of the structure. And this idea has scientific grounding. A 2009 seismic study revealed that certain chambers inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu, most notably the King's Chamber, resonate at a highly specific frequency hovering around 110 Hz. This frequency aligns with deep male vocal ranges. When researchers vocalized sustained tones inside the chamber, they found the stone began to subtly vibrate, enough to amplify sound through a kind of feedback loop. Could the ancient priests have known this? Were their rituals not just acts of devotion, but methods of communication, not only with the divine, but with the structure itself, and perhaps with something hidden far beneath it? Some symbologists argue that the entire Giza plateau was designed as a massive ceremonial device. The pyramids, the Sphinx, the stone markers, and geometric alignments weren't random. They were carefully positioned to create nodes of acoustic and light resonance, channels to direct energy or information downward into the earth. Rituals such as the opening of the mouth ceremony, originally intended to activate the soul within statues, may have had a broader purpose, unlocking invisible gates between layers of encoded knowledge. Ritual in ancient times was not superstition. It was technology, what we might now call spiritual mechanics. a system of interaction between human voice, stone, nature, sound, and sacred space. There is a curious detail recorded in Middle Kingdom texts. Once a year, on a single night, when Sirius rose directly above Giza, a ritual known as the reopening of the eye was performed. During this rite, priests stood in a spiral formation around the base of the pyramid and recited an archaic chant in a measured rhythm precisely timed to the astronomical event. Some modern scholars speculate that this moment marked a window in the activation cycle. A sacred ritual, yes, but possibly also a functional trigger, a brief alignment, a gate. Today, no such ceremony is performed, but many researchers believe that the behaviors and sounds of ancient humans were an essential part of Giza's hidden operating system. Perhaps the underground chambers are not just sealed with stone, but locked by the absence of precise frequencies, the wrong light, the forgotten cadence of sacred words. If we begin to view Giza not as a structure, but as a programmed mechanism, one that opens only when the right person, at the right time, with the right signal appears, then modern science may be nothing more than fumbling fingers trying to guess a forgotten password. And perhaps what we're missing is not a tool, but a memory. If we stop viewing Giza as a standalone monument and instead see it as a node in an ancient network, then what lies buried beneath it might not belong solely to Egypt, but to a global system that once existed or was deliberately designed by a lost civilization. When geographers and archaeologists began plotting sacred sites across the world, Giza, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, Easter Island, a strange pattern emerged. These seemingly unrelated structures fall along long, straight paths spanning thousands of kilometers, aligned precisely with latitudinal and longitudinal lines, forming what is now known as the ley lines. Some say it's coincidence, but as more sites were included. The pyramids of Central America, ancient towers in Persia, megalithic circles in Europe. The pattern only grew clearer. These monuments do not appear randomly, they seem to follow a grid based on the planet's geomagnetic energy, a network the ancients may have known and used. This offers a new lens through which to view Giza. Perhaps its location wasn't chosen for convenience, the desert sands, the local limestone, but because it sits at a crucial intersection of this global energy network. Giza lies almost exactly along the 30° north latitude, a band known for magnetic stability, minimal climate variation, and one often selected for modern astronomical observatories. Satellite surveys also reveal unusually high magnetic readings at Giza compared to the surrounding land, a phenomenon not easily explained by local geology alone. Many theories have surfaced. Some researchers propose that ancient civilizations once harnessed natural earth energies flowing through underground water channels, mineral veins, and magnetic fields to power or activate structures like pyramids. And in that system, Giza may have served as the control center or primary vault. Mathematicians have asked similar questions. Why do ancient structures across the globe repeat the same geometric proportions? From Giza to Mexico, from Peru to Cambodia? Why do constants like the golden ratio, the Pythagorean triangle, and the numbers p and f appear consistently across continents that had no known contact? The answer may not lie in trade routes, but in a shared origin. Perhaps in a time lost to history, there was once a global framework of knowledge, not spread by conquest or empire, but through architecture, mathematics, astronomy, and symbolism. And if that theory holds, then Giza isn't just a pyramid, it is the archive of that entire forgotten civilization. Its underground chambers were not built for burial, they were built to preserve memory. the collective memory of a humanity that once knew more than we do today. This theory grows stronger when we compare the positioning, orientation, and internal structures of the world's major pyramids. Nearly all exhibit energy-converging designs, align with celestial bodies, and include sloping shafts or sealed chambers aimed precisely at stars or solar events. And perhaps most curiously, most of these pyramids have underground voids, not just Giza, but Teotihuacan in Mexico, Tikal in Guatemala, even Xiangyang in China. Could it be that ancient builders concealed something beneath every one of their wonders? Not gold, not treasure, but knowledge, messages, instructions meant for a future age, for a time when humanity was ready to remember who we really are. And if Giza is truly the center, then what lies beneath it may be the final piece, the one capable of rewriting our history, our understanding of human nature, and the origin of knowledge itself. Every archaeological excavation leaves a trail, reports, photographs, samples, and artifacts catalogued and stored in museums. But at Giza, a different rule seems to apply. Not everything discovered is displayed, and not everything documented has survived. As early as the 20th century, when European expeditions poured into Egypt, diary entries reveal findings far more significant than what made it into official reports. One of the most striking cases involves Flinders Petrie, the British archaeologist often regarded as the father of modern Egyptology. In a personal note discovered after his death, Petrie described a non-classifiable object, a solid piece of metal, oddly shaped, unearthed from deep within an ancient shaft near the base of the Khafra pyramid. He wrote that it did not resemble any known metallurgical material from ancient Egypt. This object was never made public. It does not appear in any museum catalogue, not even in the Petrie Museum or the archives of University College London. Another curious case occurred in 1954 with the excavation of the so-called solar barge, a 40-meter-long wooden ship, found sealed in a pit beside the Khufu pyramid. It was made of hundreds of wooden planks joined without a single nail. But the intrigue isn't about the boat. It's about the second pit, a symmetrical chamber on the opposite side discovered at the same time. Technical surveys showed the second pit also contained a vessel-like object, but it was never opened. Why? Officially, because the first boat was already in pristine condition, making further excavation unnecessary. But many believe this was an excuse, seeing that the second chamber might contain something else, something more controversial, something not made of wood. Unofficial documents from the 1980s claimed that radar scans detected strong metallic echoes in the unopened pit, inconsistent with the wooden structure of the first boat. Soon after, the area was closed and declared off-limits. Then there's the case of a mysterious statue with a round helmet, excavated in 1922 by a French team. The statue, according to notes, did not resemble any known Egyptian artistic style, with facial features that seemed ethnically ambiguous. The helmet-like headpiece bore a striking resemblance to those seen in depictions from ancient South American cultures. The statue was sent to the Paris Institute of Archaeology for study, and was never seen again. To this day, no one knows where it went. When questioned, the museum responded that no such artifact exists in their archives, and, as always, silence replaced explanation. Why do these artifacts disappear? Accidents? Fires? Misplacement? Possibly. But the frequency and nature of these vanishings have led many to suspect something more deliberate, a selective process of omission. Perhaps what's being hidden are objects that don't fit into the accepted historical timeline, artifacts, suggesting that someone may have been in Giza before the Egyptians, or that materials and technologies existed at a time they simply weren't supposed to. In archaeology, such finds are labelled anomalies, but perhaps the better word is evidence of another history. And if those pieces of evidence are being concealed, then maybe the most important thing being buried isn't the artifact itself, but our ability to admit that we were wrong. Many have come dangerously close to uncovering the truth beneath Giza. They may not have held prestigious titles or represented powerful institutions, but they possessed something far more disruptive, independent vision and the courage to ask questions, and that at times made them thorns in the side of the academic establishment. One of the most controversial figures was Ahmed Fakhri, an Egyptian archaeologist with a doctorate from the University of Berlin, who spent years studying the Giza plateau in the 1950s and 60s. In a personal note published posthumously by his son, Fakhri described discovering a stone shaft descending underground on the southwest side of the Sphinx, sealed deliberately by human hands. According to him, the site had never been explored. When he proposed an excavation, the Antiquities Authority at the time declined, citing no evidence of architectural relevance. Not long after, Fakhri withdrew from mainstream archaeology and never published anything further about Giza. A similar story surrounds Jean-Philippe Loa, who spent nearly 5 decades excavating the Step Pyramid complex at Saqqara. During a conference, he openly stated, "We have only accessed the surface of a much deeper, larger system underground." He never named Giza directly, but those in the room understood the implication. Shortly afterward, some of his European funding sources were pulled, and his work began to be dismissed by colleagues as speculative. It wasn't only Egyptians or French scholars. A Japanese geophysicist named Hiroshi Ogawa, who worked on a ground-penetrating radar project at Giza in the early 2000s, published data showing repeating geometric voids beneath the southeastern face of the Khufu pyramid. He was swiftly removed from the international research team. Japanese news outlets later reported that he faced pressure for violating internal publication agreements. Ogawa left the field entirely, disappearing from academia without a trace. These weren't conspiracy theorists. They were engineers, geologists and archaeologists, well-trained professionals. They never claimed aliens or mythical civilizations. They simply said, there is something under Giza, and it may be more important than we've been led to believe. What makes their stories striking is not just the repetition, but the identical sequence of events: discovery, proposal, denial, disappearance. What's really going on? Is there an unspoken system of control in archaeology, where truth is only permitted if it fits the sanctioned narrative? If an underground structure beneath Giza threatens to unravel the accepted version of history, then suppressing anyone who strays outside the lines becomes understandable, and yet those individuals, forgotten by most, have left behind traces, their notes, their raw data, their hand-drawn sketches on yellowing paper. They still exist in tiny libraries, in private archives, in leaked scans that quietly circulate online. And perhaps someday those scattered fragments will be enough to reconstruct a picture that has been deliberately kept out of sight for centuries. In today's digital age, where satellite data is publicly accessible from nearly anywhere on Earth, it's hard to believe that some locations still appear blurred, distorted, or missing from online maps. And yet, Giza, home to some of the most iconic ancient structures on the planet, is one of the few such places. Numerous satellite imaging experts have noted irregularities when viewing certain spots around the base of the Khufu pyramid and the Sphinx. Platforms like Google Earth, Bing Maps, and advanced GIS software often show lower than standard resolution or inconsistent overlays that vary strangely depending on the year the image was taken. At first, this was attributed to domestic security regulations in Egypt. But when researchers compared Giza's satellite data to clearly marked military zones in other parts of the desert, a discrepancy emerged. Military bases were clearly censored, fully blurred. But Giza, only specific fragments were obscured, and at particular depths. In other words, someone doesn't want you to see what lies beneath the surface. In 2015, a Swiss independent research group used commercial satellite imagery combined with super-resolution enhancement software to recover lost detail from older Giza maps. Their findings revealed unnatural geometric anomalies beneath the sand near the Sphinx, specifically elongated rectangular shapes arranged parallel and perpendicular to one another. In short, possible signs of buried artificial structures, but they didn't stop there. The team also found something stranger still. Satellite images from the same location, taken in different years, showed unusual shifts in shadow depth and ground texture. One could chalk this up to weather or preservation efforts, but it also suggests, and this is where things get sensitive, underground surveying activity occurring outside the public eye. What deepened the mystery was the involvement of foreign defense agencies, directly or indirectly, in Giza-related projects. In 2016-2017, advanced muon detection equipment was installed inside the Khufu pyramid. The project was presented as scientific, but its funding included defense technology partners from France and Japan. While high-level reports were released, the raw data was never made public. Detailed 3D models of the internal structure, especially those showing the unknown voids, were only partially shared, with many layers of access restriction. Why would defense sectors be interested in an ancient structure? That question opens a possibility. What lies beneath Giza may not be just archaeologically valuable, it may hold strategic, technological, or even intellectual significance. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that portions of the sensing equipment at Giza are monitored or operated by non-archaeological entities. This means that data on depth, density, and subsurface anomalies is passed through multiple layers of review before any of it reaches public awareness. There are no official documents confirming this. But, like all great mysteries, the absence of information is often a clue in itself, a sign that something is being intentionally withheld. Giza, once the cradle of ancient wisdom, now appears to remain a modern center of control. No longer just a tomb for pharaohs, but possibly a vault for something far more powerful, a form of knowledge or a piece of technology that some believe has been sealed away, not with stone, but with silence and power. Not all evidence is found in libraries. Some truths are not written, but passed down. Among the people who have lived for generations around Giza, stories circulate. Fragments of memory. Warnings whispered from one generation to the next. At first glance, they seem like myths or superstition, but they contain recurring elements that are eerily consistent and uncannily aligned with modern archaeological data. For as long as anyone can remember, the locals have spoken of the wells that never echo, strange, deep holes where stones dropped make no sound, as if there is no bottom. As children, they were told never to go near them. Adults avoided saying their real names when passing by. Some places, they say, cast no shadow at noon, an impossible detail that, if true, science has yet to explain. What's most remarkable is that the locations of these so-called bottomless wells match certain coordinates identified by ground-penetrating radar as containing deep vertical voids and unnatural substructures. These areas have never been officially excavated, and yet they appear again and again in tales separated by centuries, as if the people have always known that these places lead somewhere. Another legend tells of a nameless underground guardian, a man who lives beneath Giza, who neither eats nor sleeps, and only emerges on moonless nights to exchange ancient relics for water. It sounds fantastical, but this tale exists in multiple versions told across different villages miles apart. Some believe he is a remnant of an ancient priesthood tasked with protecting something sacred, something that cannot be named. Then there's the story of the door that cannot be opened by hand, a stone slab said to lie deep beneath. The eastern paw of the Sphinx. It is said to open only when a forgotten chant is spoken. A shaft of light strikes a precise crack in the rock, on one single moment each year, at the height of the summer solstice. It sounds like legend, but some symbologists suggest that this may be an encoded astronomical instruction, a way for ancient people to preserve celestial alignments and geography through vivid imagery, a form of memory that survives when writing does not. Even more intriguingly, Islamic texts from the medieval period mention a figure known as the Keeper of the Earth Veins, a man who lives beneath Giza and possesses the map of tunnels linking the three pyramids to a repository of knowledge from those who came before the flood. It was long thought to be a metaphor, but when overlaid with modern subsurface radar scans revealing underground connections, one begins to wonder, could this be the faint outline of a collective memory? In the 1970s, French anthropologist Marcel Dussault interviewed villagers near Giza. He asked a nearly 100-year-old man why no one went near the southern wall of the Sphinx at night. The man replied without blinking, "Because the earth speaks there, not the wind." When asked if he had ever heard it himself, the old man said, "No, but my father did, and he left the village the next morning. He never returned." These stories, when viewed through a modern lens, are easy to dismiss as fantasy. But if we accept that the ancients had no paper, no tape recorders, then oral tradition was there. Data transmission system, a living library, and in these tales what chills the spine is not the ghosts or gods, but the consistency of detail, the direction, the light, the silence, the geometry, the timing. Perhaps these stories are not invented. Perhaps they are the final echoes of a truth that was once real, transformed into myth so that it could survive the centuries. And if we learn to listen, really listen, these forgotten words may be the last map still left to us. A map that points to a door humanity has been walking circles around for thousands of years without ever realizing it. In an age where humanity can send probes to the surface of Mars, it remains a strange truth that we still cannot step inside the voids that lie just beneath the ground at Giza. These spaces, detected by radar, confirmed through seismic readings, and even rendered through muon imaging, remain untouched, sealed in silence. Why? Part of the answer lies in technological limitations, but the rest, as we've seen, lies in the will to control information. Tools such as ground-penetrating radar, GPR, muon tomography, thermal imaging, and 3D geostructural modeling have revolutionized archaeology. But they are tools of detection, not instruments of entry. Once an anomaly is found beneath dozens of meters of limestone, the next logical step would be exploratory drilling or the opening of access shafts. But at Giza, such steps face a wall of technical, bureaucratic, and political barriers. The Khufu Pyramid, where most of the subterranean anomalies have been detected, is considered an international heritage site requiring absolute preservation. Any drilling, no matter how precise, must pass through layers of oversight. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, UNESCO, international conservation bodies, and often the governments of foreign sponsors. Even when science strongly suggests an artificial structure underground, touching it remains nearly impossible. There's also the matter of engineering. Some of these voids lie within bedrock, sealed environments that may contain toxic gases, unstable pressure systems, or fragile walls prone to collapse. Access would require ultra-compact, remote-operated equipment that causes zero vibration. Robots like JEDI, which explored the ventilation shafts within the Great Pyramid, are among the few examples ever deployed, but their range is limited to mere meters. They cannot navigate a full-scale unknown labyrinth. Then there's the issue of spatial orientation deep within stone. GPS signals do not penetrate thick rock. Radar data provides only approximate images, not enough to guide autonomous movement. Modern archaeological teams are developing AI-driven spatial simulations to reconstruct Giza's subsurface from fragmented data. But we're still far from locating the voids with the accuracy required for safe exploration. And even if the technology becomes capable, the final question remains: who gets to decide what will be explored? Because as we've seen in earlier accounts, even when a passageway is discovered, it can still be sealed with paperwork. In 2020, an international coalition proposed using low-pressure, soft-bore drilling to investigate a suspected chamber beneath the Sphinx. The project was quietly rejected. No public explanation was given. But according to an internal source, Egyptian officials were concerned about the serious consequences if the discovery contradicted established historical narratives. In other words, science is permitted until it threatens the structure of thought. This is the paradox of our modern era. We have the tools to know what lies beneath the earth, but not the permission, or perhaps not the courage, to go there. Giza, with all the secrets science is beginning to unveil, remains a locked door. Not one sealed by codes or traps, but by human hesitation. And so the voids remain, buried beneath stone, shrouded in darkness, as if waiting for a generation brave enough to break through the boundary between technology, power, and history. When we step back and look at everything we know, or everything we don't, about Giza, a pattern begins to emerge. Each structure, each detail, each mathematical proportion seems anything but accidental. They don't just point to the heavens. They don't merely honor the dead. They behave more like fragments of a system, a machine built to store knowledge, designed to withstand the erosion of time. This is no longer just speculation. Many modern researchers now conclude the pyramids, the Sphinx, the underground tunnels, and the voids beneath Giza may together form a kind of eternal library, not built to be used, but built to wait. But wait for what? Perhaps a cataclysm, perhaps a future civilization, or perhaps something simpler: to wait until humankind is capable and humble enough to understand that wisdom is not only written in books, but also carved in stone. Take the construction of the Khufu pyramid, massive limestone blocks placed with near-perfect precision, not to dazzle with size, but to protect whatever lies within across thousands of years. Through wars, earthquakes, and the wear of time, it remains intact, as if someone anticipated every possible disruption. This tells us the intent to preserve was real. But then the deeper question follows: what was so important that it had to be safeguarded for eternity? If it were only a tomb, why the mathematical codes? Why the sloping corridors? Why the shafts aligned with stars? If it were merely a monument to power, why the hidden chambers? Why the gaze of the Sphinx fixed on a star that appears just once a year? More and more scholars believe Giza was built as an information lock, with modern humans as the key holders, yet unaware of how to turn. The key, a machine with no electricity, activated instead by time, light, sound, and celestial alignment. Each component, a line of code, and when all codes align, the door opens. This isn't fantasy. The ancient Egyptians didn't just write with words, they wrote with symbols. Each shape, each placement had dual meaning, one for the eyes of the commoner, one for those who knew how to read the truth beneath. If the Great Pyramid is a message, it is not written in language. It is written in geometry, in mathematics, in wind direction, and in the way sunlight passes through a single slit at one exact moment of the year. Perhaps we haven't read it yet, not because we lack the tools, but because we've never truly considered that it is a language. Some even believe that Giza is not the first, but the final node in a global chain of knowledge repositories, each location holding part of the truth, but only at Giza is the full puzzle assembled, and so it was built with the highest level of defense, guarded by stone, by myth, by fear, and by the arrogance of the modern mind. The irony is that as our science advances, we may be moving further from understanding Giza, not closer. We believe so deeply in our own models that we dismiss the voice of the stone. We detect hidden voids with radar, then abandon them because they don't fit our timelines. We find strange shafts aligned with stars, then call them superstition. We uncover air channels with improbable geometry and label them coincidence. But what if one day all those coincidences align into a system? What if Giza was never meant to be excavated, but decoded? And if that's true, then what lies buried beneath the sands may not be just a chamber or an artifact, but the ultimate admission that ancient intelligence was never beneath us. It may have always stood just beyond our reach, waiting. For centuries, what happens above the Giza plateau has been controlled by the few, sometimes pharaohs, sometimes religious institutions, and sometimes modern governments. But regardless of who held power, one thing has never changed. What lies beneath Giza has never truly belonged to the public. This is especially puzzling in the age of information, a world where satellite images scan down to the leaves of trees, where global data is shared in real time, and where access to knowledge is seen as a universal right. So why is Giza still a blank space, intentionally left off the map? Is there something too vast, too strange, or too disruptive to the accepted version of history to ever be allowed into the light? Many believe the answer lies in systematic control. Not the dramatic kind seen in Hollywood, but a quieter, more pragmatic reality. A tacit partnership between governments, museums, conservation, bodies, and academia. Look at recent history. Any discovery beneath Giza that doesn't fit neatly into the narrative of royal tombs is quickly downplayed, delayed, or dismissed. Independent researchers are pushed aside. Excavation teams are required to sign non-disclosure agreements before receiving permits. And the images from advanced scanning equipment, they're only made public after careful editing. Why? One obvious reason is the fear of historical upheaval. If there truly is an ancient library beneath Giza, or evidence of a prehistoric civilization with advanced knowledge, then it's not just archaeology that gets shaken. Our entire view of history, religion, and global identity would need rewriting. That's not just an academic inconvenience. It would be a social shockwave. Questions like, who came first? Where did human history actually begin? And how much truth have we really been told would no longer be philosophical. They would become political, and that may be why even organizations with differing goals seem to agree on one thing. Don't open Giza until there's a safe story to tell. But beyond ideology, some analysts suggest there's something else at play: strategic interest. If what lies beneath includes unknown materials, devices, or structures with capabilities beyond our time, then this is no longer archaeology. It becomes national security. That might explain why defense agencies, tech corporations, and unnamed global actors are silently present in the background. Behind the scientific language is a quiet surveillance race, each side waiting, watching, hoping to be the first if something truly unexpected is uncovered. And so perhaps no one really wants the door opened until they're the ones holding the key. But there's another theory, quieter, more unsettling. What's hidden beneath Giza might not be from the past, but from the future. Not an object, but a kind of knowledge meant to remain dormant until we are ready. It sounds abstract, but if Giza truly is a knowledge vault built to open only when humanity reaches a certain point, then maybe silence is the security system, not enforced by law, but by time, not locked by force, but by our level of understanding. Maybe the door doesn't stay closed because someone is guarding it. Maybe it stays closed because we still haven't learned how to ask the right question. Imagine that day finally comes. A morning in the not-so-distant future, beneath the quiet skies of the Egyptian desert, as the first golden light touches the eastern face of the Great Pyramid, a door opens. Not a symbolic door, not a theory, but a real passageway, sealed for thousands of years, leading down into a space no one has entered since it was first built. What would happen? The world of science would surge forward, global headlines would explode, institutions would rush to claim excavation rights, to assert control, to define what is found. Old definitions would be questioned, history would tremble, but inside that chamber, what truly awaits? An empty room? A cache of ancient artifacts? A geometric structure beyond imagination? Or a message, maybe a carving in symbols, maybe a strange piece of technology that fits no known era, maybe an entire system of knowledge, not written in words, but in light, vibration, or sound, meant to be understood only by those willing to see with new eyes. And the real question becomes, how will we see it? Through the lens of science, to measure, to categorize, to label? Or through the quiet wonder of a traveler, willing simply to listen? Because what lies in that chamber might not just speak of the past. It might reflect us, who we are, where we came from, and whether everything we've believed so far is just a fragment of something far larger left behind by those who once knew. The true mystery is not the door, it's who will open it, and whether we'll be ready to understand what waits on the other side. Perhaps it's already been opened. Perhaps the ancients once walked in and then sealed it again, not out of fear, but because they knew. We weren't ready yet, and now, after thousands of years, we stand before it again, not only with technology, radar, scans, 3D models, but with one essential question: if what we're about to find doesn't fit anything we've ever known, do we have the courage not to turn away? Giza has never been waiting for someone to break the code. It's been waiting for someone willing to listen, and maybe, on some quiet day, when the desert wind holds its breath and the sunlight hits a single stone at the exact angle long foretold, the door will open. Not because we've grown powerful enough, but because, finally, we've grown humble enough. Not everything that is written is allowed to exist. History has its redacted lines, science has its buried pages, and Giza, a place long seen as a symbol of ancient light, has also been the tomb for countless efforts to uncover the truth. Since the early 19th century, scholars, writers, engineers, and archaeologists have raised questions about the inconsistencies surrounding Giza. Unexcavated voids, underground structures absent from official records, and mathematical ratios too precise to be accidental. But instead of being encouraged to dig deeper, many were quietly silenced. One of the strangest examples is a book titled La Porte de Pierre, The Stone Gate, published in Paris in 1891, written under the pseudonym A.B. It described in detail a hidden network of chambers beneath Giza, allegedly based on oral accounts from a Coptic monk in the 15th century. Just months after release, every copy was pulled from circulation, officially for religious offense. Though the book mostly discussed architecture and symbolism, a single surviving copy resurfaced in a private archive in Lyon in 1997. In it was a chilling line: "The guardian of stone does not sleep. Beneath the earth lies not the dead, but a promise. Only when human memory reaches its own shame will the gate unlock." Was it fiction or a disguised memoir? No one knows, but the fact the book was destroyed remains a question in itself. Another case, Dr. Edward Arkin, an American geologist who surveyed Giza in 1933. He documented what he believed were man-made subterranean walls, aligned parallel to the Khafre Pyramid's inner corridor. His report was rejected by the Cairo Institute of Archaeology as unverifiable. Shortly after, he was excluded from all future international projects. His manuscript was found years later in a family file box with a scrawled note: "They don't want anyone digging down." Even in modern times, censorship still echoes. In 2009, a group of engineering students from the University of Munich created a 3D subterranean map of Giza using open-source data. They identified an unusual sunken zone near the eastern base of the Sphinx. They posted their findings on an academic forum. The post was removed within 72 hours. When asked, the students replied they had been advised to choose a different thesis if they wished to graduate. The research was never published again. A pattern keeps repeating. The closer one gets to the center of Giza, the less can be said. Not due to lack of evidence, but because of invisible boundaries, unspoken lines of consensus that, once crossed, place researchers in a kind of exile where their data disappears, their names fade from records, and their work is dismissed as unscientific. Somewhere, in a dusty cabinet of a forgotten university, in the sealed archives of a national museum, there may still be maps, sketches, or observations written by those who saw, who knew, but were forced to forget. And perhaps, if those documents were ever allowed to return, they would connect like fragments of a forgotten mosaic, a picture we've only ever seen one part of. But what about the rest? We may never know until the things long hidden are no longer labeled dangerous, but recognized for what they truly are, essential pieces of our shared human memory. History, as we know it, is not the truth. It is simply the version most often repeated, and sometimes the version least dangerous to believe. Since the moment humanity began recording memory in language, images, and stone, history has become an ongoing negotiation between those who hold power and those who seek the truth. Because writing history is not just about telling a story, it is the authority to define who we are, where we came from, and what we should believe. And if you can rewrite the past, you can shape the future. The story of Giza is a prime example of how history is filtered. What fits the framework is preserved. What does not is labeled myth, superstition, or pseudoscience, each placed into its own drawer, sealed, filed, and forgotten. Why? Because sometimes truth is too inconvenient to be known. Imagine just for a moment that we truly did discover a hidden library beneath Giza, a trace of a prehistoric civilization far more advanced than we thought possible. Such a discovery wouldn't only impact archaeology, it would force education to rewrite textbooks, it would compel religion to converse with science, it would require political power to rethink national origin stories. What would be threatened then, not the pyramids, but the entire architecture of knowledge we've built and defended for centuries. That's why for hundreds of years, civilizations have maintained some form of memory control, retaining only what aligns with the moment and discarding what is not yet meant to be understood. But that choice comes at a cost. When we leave out the uncomfortable fragments, we also sever our connection to something that has always made humans wise, the humility of recognizing our own limits. Maybe that's why the voids beneath Giza remain unopened. Not because we lack the tools, but because we're not yet ready to accept how little we know. And in that refusal, history continues its quiet loop to remember selectively, then forget, then reconstruct from broken. But true memory cannot be erased. It can only be hidden in stone, in legend, in ancient maps, and in the questions we never dared ask out loud. Giza is not alone. It is only one of many places on Earth silently holding the secrets of humankind, secrets once carved by hand, aligned by stars, and buried by time. If one day we wish to find ourselves again, we won't need to look far into the cosmos. We'll only need to return to the voids that history left behind, and gather the courage to ask, once more, the questions that were once silenced. Nothing truly ends at Giza. When the last light of day brushes across the worn surface of the Great Pyramid, and the shadow of the Sphinx stretches long like a silent cut between sand and sky, you're no longer certain if you're standing in the present, or if you've stepped quietly into a moment from thousands of years ago, because here, time doesn't flow, it gathers. Maybe all those underground corridors don't lead to treasure or to power. Maybe they lead to something far simpler, memory. The memory of a civilization that once knew more than we dare imagine. The memory of people who looked to the stars not to pray but to measure. The memory of hands that carved stone not to show glory but to leave something behind for someone in a future far ahead. And now we stand here. We are that future. The only question is, are we ready to listen to what they tried to say? Giza. Maybe a story never fully told, or worse, a story deliberately left untold, because if the truth buried beneath its surface goes against everything we've believed for centuries, then it's not just textbooks that must be rewritten, but our sense of identity, our understanding, our pride in modern knowledge. Maybe that's why the door has never opened. Not because it's sealed in stone, but because it's meant for those patient enough, respectful enough, quiet enough to reach for it. With humility, Giza doesn't need to be broken open. It needs to be heard. And perhaps that whisper won't be found in radar scans or on official maps, but in a dream of someone listening to this story right now on a quiet night. Maybe it's you, the one on the other side of this screen, you who already carries the right question. The question's soft enough to open a door that humanity has only circled for thousands of years. We don't promise to have answers. We don't believe anyone truly holds the whole truth. But here at Bedtime History, we believe in the power of storytelling, told slowly, gently, and without judgment, to rediscover the chapters history chose to forget. Because history never really sleeps. It lives in every night we lie down, close our eyes, and allow ourselves to listen. Not to find the final truth, but to make sure we don't forget what once mattered. So if you believe stories like this are worth telling, if you feel there's still something in Giza's sands waiting to be heard, then follow Bedtime History, not because we know everything, but because we're searching too, just like you. And sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, a slow story from the past is what brings us closest to what's been hidden, in history, in stone, and in ourselves. Sleep well. The story isn't over. It's just time to pause and listen again tomorrow night.